Welcome to this BDCOM GPON configuration tutorial. In this video, we'll guide you through the process of configuring GPON ONU bandwidth limits using the GUI. To get started, log into your GPON OLT through the web-based GUI using your administrator credentials. Once logged in, navigate to the GPON configuration section to begin the configuration process. Before configuring the bandwidth limits, you first need to create a T-CONT profile. However, before we proceed with the configuration steps, it is important to understand what a T-CONT is and how it functions within a GPON network. In GPON networks, a T-CONT, short for transmission container, acts as a logical container that controls how upstream bandwidth is allocated. The OLT uses these T-CONTs to manage exactly how much bandwidth each ONU or each service is allowed to use. Every T-CONT is defined by three key bandwidth parameters. First, there's FIR, the fixed information rate, which represents strictly reserved bandwidth that the ONU can always use. Next is CIR, the committed information rate, which guarantees a minimum level of bandwidth even during congestion. And finally, there's PIR, the peak information rate, which allows the ONU to temporarily burst above the guaranteed rate whenever extra bandwidth is available. There are 5 types of T-CONT, or transmission containers, used in GPON networks, and each works differently. Type 1, fixed, uses FIR only. The bandwidth is always available, even if you don't use it. Best for voice. Type 2, assured, uses CIR only. The bandwidth is guaranteed, but only when you actually have data to send. Best for video. Type 3, non-assured, uses CIR plus PIR. You get a guaranteed minimum bandwidth, but can burst up to a higher peak if the network allows it. Type 4, best effort, uses PIR only. There are no guarantees. You reach the peak speed only when the network has available capacity. Best for web browsing. Type 5, mixed, uses FIR, CIR, and PIR together. The all-in-one container designed for services that handle voice, video, and internet simultaneously. Now, let's return to configuring the T-CONT profile and ONU bandwidth limits. In this example, we will configure the ONU bandwidth limit to sort 10 megabits per second for both upstream and downstream traffic. To create a T-CONT profile, navigate to the ONU Profile Config tab and select ONU T-CONT. Click New to create a new T-CONT profile. Enter a profile name. In this example, we will use T-CONT 10MB as the profile name. Next, select the T-CONT type according to your requirements. The available types range from 1 to 5. In this tutorial, we will select Type 4. Since we are using T-CONT Type 4, only the peak bandwidth parameter can be configured. For this example, we will set the peak bandwidth to 10,240 kilobits per second, or 10 megabits per second. For other T-CONT types, additional parameters, such as fixed bandwidth and committed bandwidth, may also be available for configuration, depending on the selected T-CONT type. Leave the remaining parameters unchanged unless your deployment requires specific modifications. Once the T-CONT profile is created, navigate to T-CONT Virtual Port Bind to bind the T-CONT profile to a virtual port. Click New and enter a profile name. In this example, we will use TV Bind 10MB, then click Confirm. After creating the profile, click Edit beside the newly created profile. Next, click New to add a virtual port binding. Enter the virtual port ID. Since this is our first binding, we will use ID 1. Select the virtual port profile. This profile maps physical ports to virtual ports. For this tutorial, we will use the default profile. Then, enter the T-CONT ID as 1. From the T-CONT profile drop-down menu, select the T-CONT 10MB profile that we created earlier. Click Confirm to save the configuration. Since this configuration uses a single virtual port for all physical ports, we will use serial number 1. If you need different bandwidth profiles for different ports, you must create additional virtual port binding profiles. You can now close the window. Next, we need to apply this profile to the ONU. Navigate to Port Config and select ONU ports. Locate your desired ONU and click Config ONU. Under the Base Config section, change the T-CONT bind virtual port profile to TV bind 10B, then click Apply. This configuration limits the ONU's upstream bandwidth. To configure the downstream bandwidth, open the Virtual Port tab. Enable Downstream Rate Limit and enter the desired downstream bandwidth value. In this example, we will configure the download bandwidth to 10 megabits per second. Click Confirm to apply the settings. The bandwidth configuration is now complete. Let's verify the configuration by performing a speed test. That concludes this tutorial. If you have any questions or need further assistance, feel free to leave a comment below. We'll be happy to help. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next tutorial.